I'm sick of this crap.
Well, Essendon has been defeated by Geelong by 95 points at the MCG on Saturday twilight football in what you'd have to say was a boringly predictable Essendon-Geelong game. So typical of so many Essendon-Geelong games over the last 20 years. These games used to be classics back in the 1990s. They were played in front of big crowds of over 75,000 in the mid-90s. There were great comebacks. There was the centenary game in 1996. And then it's just all a distant memory now where we have the kind of rubbish that was served up year after year. And we're going to talk about it in this video. And you can vent all about it in the comments right now. So I guess we were all hoping, me included, that we could at least be competitive in this match. And for at least portions of the first half, I think, even though the scoreboard wasn't indicating it, I thought we looked competitive when we were moving the ball forward at least. We were terrible at defending. And there were some positives out of there, but we just couldn't put any score on the board. I mean, even when we were looking okay with the ball, we could still only have 2 goals on the board until very, very late in the second quarter. And at the end of the day, we just can't handle Geelong's ball movement. Geelong are just one of the smartest ball movement teams in the competition. They have copious amounts of smart inside 50s. They had 63 inside 50s for the match. But it's not just that. It's what they do when they get it in there. They had 21 marks inside 50. If you allow the opposition to have 21 marks inside 50, then there's 21 shots on goal, which is an insane amount. That's the most amount of marks inside 50 that we've let in for the year. And that's Geelong's strength. If you allow them to play the game on their terms, they will just cut you up. And that's their strength, their ball movement game. And I did mention in my preview thread, if we're to be any chance, or at least to be somewhat competitive, we had to have a time in possession higher than about 42%. Our time in possession wasn't too bad. It was actually 39%. But the problem was so many of our disposals were handballs. We had 404 disposals. We actually had more disposals than Geelong. But that's so misleading because we had more handballs than kicks. I mean, fancy having 203 handballs. That's an insane amount of handballs. I mean, it should really be a 2-to-1 ratio. So whilst we were retaining possession, which is fundamentally the right thing to do against Geelong on a macro level, you do need to maintain possession against them. At the end of the day, too many of those possessions were dinky little handballs which put us under pressure, and that meant we turned the ball over and we just coughed up far too many goals. In fact, the amount of intercept possessions, or the amount of intercept scoring that Geelong was able to generate from intercepts was 16, 11, 107. 16 goals, 11 behinds, 107 from intercept possessions, from intercept marks, other ways of intercepting the ball, which is the highest amount of any team this year. They also scored 13 goals, 785 from forward half possession chains. So if you allow a team to score more than 100 points from intercepts, you are no chance of winning. And that's one of the frustrating things I do find about Essendon. And it's also frustrating about Geelong because they're frustratingly good and we kind of all hate them and we're sick of them. But at the end of the day, they're smart. They're not just talented, but they're also just a smart football team. And it's not as if they're chock full of high draft picks either. I mean, they have got some good free agents there and things like that, but it's not as if they've had a lot of top 10 picks. But the reality is that the biggest scoring source in the AFL is from turnover. It's not from stoppage, it's not from kick-ins, it's from turnover. And that's where Geelong got most of their scores today, and it's an area that they and Collingwood do very well. We do very poorly in that. However, we're quite good in clearances, and we're pretty good at stoppages. Now, it's all very well. You want to be good at clearances. You want to be good at stoppages. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want to be good at the things that matter. I want to be good at the things that actually generate the most scores. It's all very well to be good at clearances and stoppages, and you want to be the best in the AFL at those things if you can. But we're not the best in the AFL at the most important things. And that's really one of the fundamental problems that I've had with Essendon for a long time is that we're very, very inefficient. There's a lot of effort that gets put in, but very little reward that gets, shown back for that effort. We put, all this work in, or at least it seems like we put this work in, but it seems like it's into the wrong areas. That's how it seems to me. It seems like it's into the wrong areas, and that's why we just get these years that year on year we just sort of fail to have any improvement. Now, before I go too much further, let me say it is just one game. We did have many players out with injury. We were playing a team who we just are seemingly incapable of beating in any way. And at the end of the day, if we are to develop as a team, it's not going to be about this match. There's going to be a lot of other things moving forward. So it's not as if this match in isolation is the death knell or anything of us. It's kind of a predictable result. It is just frustrating because we all just want to have that win over Geelong. And I do think, broadly speaking, that we are on the right track. We've had a lot of debutants this year. We've got a lot of promising young players. But look, at the end of the day today, even with all the effort and planning that I'm sure went into the game, as it does every week, we're just not able to cover all those absences from the back line, especially when our skill set is just not up to what Geelong's is. And that's another part of the problem with us and something we need to work on in the off-season, and that's improving our basic skill level. It's not as if the skill level is 1 out of 10. It's not. But it needs to be an 8 out of 10. And we're kind of like a 6. But the difference between a 6 and an 8 is turning it over 10 extra times, which could result in 10 goals. That's the difference. And a few years ago, I remember hearing a story about the Western Bulldogs. And I think it might have been the year before they won the premiership, or it might have been the year before that. And Luke Beveridge just went to work on their skills during the off-season. Yeah, you think, well, every club does that. But I mean, they went like almost disproportionately so. They were focusing, way more on skills than game plan or anything like that. They were just focusing. Their entire summer was just on the skill game. And you'd have to say that they've pretty much been, under Beveridge, a pretty skillful team. They've pretty much been known as that. I think that's something we really need to do. I've been on about our game plan this year. For those who have been watching this channel, you'd be aware that I've been critical of our game plan. And I think that's something that we can work on in the off-season. I think that's something that they can put their heads together. But all that doesn't matter if your skills are not up to par, right? We just need to focus, I think, disproportionately, and that's the key word here, disproportionately on things that are important. And, less proportionately, if you like, or whatever the opposite for disproportionate is. Sorry, I'm lost my train of thought there. But focus less on the things that are not important. So, yeah, and it is so frustrating losing to this team. I've kind of had it with them. We all respect them, of course we do. But look, I was speaking to some Geelong supporters after the game, and they were saying that it was the best they've played this year. And it kind of infuriated me hearing that, because I was like, really? That was the best? The best they've played this year was in a match where they had almost zero motivation to be at their best. They could have been at half their best and they could have won. Right? And it's not, they didn't save their best for Collingwood or Brisbane or anyone like that. They saved their best game for the year, according to the supporters I was talking to. They saved their best game for the year for us. Could you believe it? It kind of makes you sick. It really does. It kind of makes you sick when you think about it. But anyway, just having a look at the game. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail with all the to's and fro's of the who kicked all the goals when. I normally give a bit of a brief run of who kicked the goals in the first quarter, second quarter, or whatever. Look, I don't think there's much point doing that. We all saw the game. Quarter time, we trailed by 23 points. I thought we were going kind of okay in the sense that we could have been a little bit closer. I thought it was really just our defence that was allowing too many inside 50s, but I thought we probably could have kicked another couple of goals. But as the match went on, we continued to cough up the ball, and we also couldn't put scores on the board. We had 3-7, for example, at half-time. If we had 7-3, well, wouldn't have made any difference to the result, but it would have been a little bit more competitive. And what's interesting, expected score, if you follow expected score, and I kind of follow the expected score just for general interest, showed that it should have been a 62-point win, right? Not 95. So look, you can take that for what it is. It's a could have, should have, would have stat, but nevertheless, it does show you that conversion is kind of important, and Geelong did kick a number of good goals from difficult shots, which is good play, and you've got to give them credit for that. But at half-time, the Cats led by 35 points, 9-6-60 to 3 goals, 7-25. I thought straight after half-time, there was some good effort initially. I thought Caddy was determined. I saw him do a really good chase on, I can't remember who the Geelong player was. I was watching the game live at the ground, so often you miss some of the stuff that you hear on television from the commentary and all that sort of thing. I thought the effort was there, but the problem is we kicked 5 goals, but there wasn't much reward for effort because Geelong kicked 7. And Cameron continued to, dominate, ended up kicking 6 goals in this match. We were down 49 points at three-quarter time. And at the time, I was disappointed. You're 49 points down. I was just hoping it wasn't going to be a blowout in the last quarter, and we could keep it to, around what it was, 49, 50 points, maybe 10 goals, something like that. So the fact that they kicked, the last 7 goals of the match to blow it out to, nearly 100 points was very disappointing. But then again, we shouldn't just look at the last quarter in isolation. It is only 30 minutes of football, and it's not necessarily reflective of everything. We had the 2 first gamers play, Archer May and Blackiston. So it's good that they got their first caps. That was really exciting for them. Archer May, didn't really contribute the game that much. Did have a shot for goal. It would have been nice if he kicked that goal. He was outside 50 and it just got touched on the line. He's a big kick. I've seen him have a big shot in the VFL last week, and he's a big long kick. Blackiston, in retrospect, might not have been ready. He was trialled at half back last week in the VFL as basically a stopgap measure or an experiment to see if he could help in the back line, and he did well, and he was picked because of that one game. So because of one game in the back line where he hasn't really played before, as I'm aware, he was picked as a ruckman, he then gets thrown into the deep end against Geelong. Now, that's not his fault, right? That's absolutely not his fault. Maybe the coaching staff shouldn't have picked him, but it was a gamble, probably didn't pay off. But we'll see how it goes. I'd like to see him at some point get another chance in perhaps a more, perhaps a setting that is a bit more conducive to him being successful rather than just being thrown in the deep end like that. So some of the key stats, disposals, as I said, we actually had more disposals, but look at those kicks. Same amount of kicks as handballs. Geelong had a ratio of nearly 2-1 kicks to handballs. And that's why they're such a smart team, because they move the ball pretty quickly, but they move it by foot. So they move it with distance and they move it accurately. And they're able to just generate all those scores inside 50. You can see there we had 26 stoppage clearances. They had 19-9 centre clearances. So the fact that we had 26-14 stoppage clearances, yeah, that's good, but that's just not a stat that, despite what people think, that's not a stat that really leads to scoring. Turnover is. That's something that we need to get better at. Contested possessions, we led that stat 122 to 117, but once again, so what? All right, so what? It's good to win that stat, but it's really not an important stat for winning games. Well, you don't want to lose it by a lot, right? But it's provided you break even in that stat, that's really all that matters. Marks, Geelong 141 marks to 98, including 21 inside 50 marks to 7. Just a total domination. That's what's going to happen when you have a hell of a lot more kicks than your opponent because your opponent's handballing all the time. Just a really dominant display in terms of marking the ball. And 13 tackles inside 50 to Geelong to 4. And yeah, look, it's just a domination by the Cats, and frustratingly so that we weren't able to go with them. You do wonder if we're ever going to beat them again. It just seems like we're farther away than ever. As for the players, well, how did they go? Well, Setterfield, I thought, had a really good game. I thought he was perhaps our best player. He had 130 ranking points, 31 possessions, 10 tackles. So you really couldn't fault his game. Same with Jai Caldwell. He also had 10 tackles, 28 possessions. I felt, just to the naked eye, Caldwell didn't seem that influential, but the reality is None of the players did really, but in terms of who our best players were, I thought he had a pretty good game. Zach Johnson is probably the one that we're going to look at from this game as a bit of a sort of a standout against Geelong, tough opposition in only his, I think third game now. He had 29 possessions and 8 marks. So what a great effort from Zach Johnson, 84 ranking points. So I think he's going to be a really good player for us. I think we've all sort of thought that he's probably going to be, or potentially could be, the pick of the bunch, he and Angus Clark of that draft. Nick Martin, 26 possessions and 88 ranking points. And it kind of falls away after that. We had a lot of players that just battled hard but didn't really have any major impact on the game. Dersma, 20 possessions, 71 ranking points. Jackson Pryor continues to improve. Look, after a shaky start early in the season from the first couple of games, he's been pretty solid. And you don't really notice him that much. I think that's a good thing. Some players you need to notice. I think when you're a backman, sometimes it's better if you're not getting noticed, if you're just doing your job. And look, Jackson Pryor had 28 possessions, 7 marks, but was well beaten by the big Geelong forwards down there. Same with Laverty, who was beaten. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be hard for him. You know, Neil and Cameron had sort of field days. Cameron kicking 6 and Neil kicking 4. So Laverty ended up, being beaten. He still had the 19 disposals and 13 marks. And look, he's toiling away as best he can. But at the end of the day, he was beaten by the Geelong Stars down there. Merritt started slowly. He worked his way a bit more into the game, committed some turnovers that were not like him, but he still had the 29 possessions and 100 ranking points. Archie Roberts battled away with 27 possessions. Todd Goldstein, I thought, was perhaps, along with Setterfield, our best player. I thought he was really, really good. He just, he's just an evergreen, isn't he, Todd? 111 ranking points, 31 hitouts, and even the 21 possessions. Darcy Parish only had 8 kicks but had 18 handballs, so he did get a bit handball happy. He's getting the ball. Look, second game back, he'll get better. He is a little bit ineffective at the moment. He only had the 72 ranking points. He's not really influencing the game much. He would often get the ball out of a contested situation, often handball to sometimes a stationary target or, a player running who was, into space but, who was too close to a Geelong player. But at the end of the day, second game back, 26 possessions will give him a bare pass. So I think Peter Wright, 2 goals. I think Peter should be very, very happy with his form this last month or so. He's continuing to kick a couple of goals every week. We didn't really expect much from him this year, but he's actually providing a lot more now than what I thought he would have when the year started. Guelphy kicked a couple of goals, which is all you can really ask. Kako kicked a goal from 13 possessions. Once again, a lot of handballs. Kako last week had 1 kick, 9 handballs. This week he had 3 kicks and 10 handballs. So he does love the handball this last couple of weeks. I actually thought he did all right to the naked eye. Like I said, you guys might have been watching on TV. I was watching at the ground. He did seem to be involved, busy, around the play, a lot of effort, a lot of chasing, that sort of thing. That was just my view to the naked eye. McGrath turned the ball over a couple of times, only had the 5 kicks, 14 handballs. There's so many players that had so many handballs. McGrath 5 and 14. That is a 3-to-1 ratio of handballs to kicks from McGrath. Archer May, like I said, not a huge contribution in his first game. You wouldn't expect it. Had that 1 shot at goal. Angus Clark had a little bit of a quiet game. Gresham kicked a nice little goal in the first quarter, but was quiet after that. Perkins came on as the sub and, look, had no real influence on the game. Had the 7 possessions. Lual also had no real influence, looked a little bit out of his depth. I'm still not sure Lual's ready, if I'm to be perfectly honest with you. Caddy struggled, just kicked it behind. His effort was there, chasing. I think he really wanted... It was one of those games he was really desperate to influence the game, but sometimes in a game like this, when you're a key forward for the team that's losing by 100 points, there's just not a lot you can do, and it just wasn't really his game, and a lot of that's not his fault. Archer Daywicks was subbed off, and Blackiston, as I said before, you could argue was probably debuted too early, simply on the basis of 1 good VFL game in a position that he'd never played before, or at least had not played until very, very recently. So interesting to see what happens with him next week. So I'm going to leave it at that, everybody. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Did you go to the game? I hope for your sake that you didn't. I was very, very sick over the last couple of days. I spent 16 hours in bed on the Wednesday and the Thursday, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to go to the game. But unfortunately, I got better. And that meant I had to go to the game. And that meant that I had to endure the freezing cold and a 95-point loss to the Bombers. So let me know what you guys think, everybody. Have a great day. And as always, go Bombers.